For 9 seasons, Last Man Standing was appointment television for millions of American families. It had the warmth of a classic multi-camera sitcom, a lead actor audiences already loved from the 90s, and a premise that let it poke fun at everything from parenting to politics without ever losing its heart. But behind the studio audience laughter, the show went through more turmoil than most viewers ever realized. Actors vanished between seasons. A network canceled it at the height of its popularity, only for a rival network to resurrect it a year later. Characters were quietly recast, storylines were rewritten around scheduling conflicts, and a pandemic nearly derailed the whole production. This is the real story of why the cast of Last Man Standing kept changing, and how a show that should have ended in 2017 somehow found its way to a proper finale 4 years later. By 2011, Tim Allen had been away from weekly network television for more than a decade. He had built Home Improvement into one of the defining sitcoms of the 90s, then spent the years afterward doing films and voice work rather than committing to another series. Multiple networks wanted him back, and by most accounts, he turned down several lucrative offers, including a deal from CBS reportedly worth roughly $1 million an episode, because none of the projects felt right. What eventually pulled him back was a character built specifically around who he had become as a performer, a man who was older, a little wiser, and unmistakably more opinionated than Tim, the Tool Man Taylor, had ever been allowed to be. Series creator Jack Burdett pitched Mike Baxter as a modern spin on the family patriarch archetype, and ABC saw an opportunity to do something bolder than a standard family comedy. Network executives wanted a show that echoed the spirit of All in the Family, with a conservative-leaning father whose worldview would constantly bump up against a household full of women who saw things differently. Allen reportedly turned the role down more than once before finally agreeing, and only after negotiating a deal that gave him creative control as an executive producer. That decision mattered enormously down the road because it gave Allen real influence over how far the show could lean into political material, and it shaped the tone of nearly every season that followed. ABC placed the show in the Friday night slot, historically one of the toughest time periods in network television because so many viewers are out of the house. It was a gamble that paid off almost immediately. The premiere in October 2011 pulled in more than 13 million viewers, making it one of the network's strongest comedy launches in years, and the show quickly became a dominant performer in its time slot, especially with viewers in the coveted 18 to 49 demographic. Over its first run on ABC, Last Man Standing consistently averaged well above 8 million viewers a season, numbers that most sitcoms on any network would envy. Which is exactly what made everything that followed so confusing to longtime fans. Long before the show made national headlines for its cancellation, it made a much quieter change that fans still talk about. Alexandra Krosny originated the role of Kristen Baxter, Mike's eldest daughter, and a young single mother juggling a waitressing job, a toddler, and life back under her parents' roof. Krosny brought a scrappy, sharp-tongued energy to the character, and her chemistry with Allen produced some of the first season's most memorable exchanges. Then, after just 1 season, she was gone, replaced by actress Amanda Fuller, with barely any explanation given to the audience. The official line at the time was the familiar industry phrase, creative differences, but the real reasoning was more layered than that. Producers wanted to shift Kristen's arc away from a struggling young mom storyline and toward a character who felt more seasoned and more capable of going toe-to-toe with her father on political and social topics, since that friction was central to the show's format. There was also a more practical, almost logistical issue at play. Even though Kristen was written as the eldest sister, Krosny was actually younger than Molly Ephraim, who played the middle daughter Mandy. That mismatch reportedly bothered the producers enough that they wanted an actress who read as older to anchor the eldest child role, and Fuller fit that requirement. It was an uncomfortable start for a show that would go on to have a surprisingly stable relationship with most of its cast, at least for a while. Kristen's on-again, off-again relationship with her baby's father, Ryan Vogelson, became one of the show's more unusual recasting stories. The character was actually introduced by a recognizable name. Nick Jonas made a guest appearance during the show's first Christmas episode, playing Ryan as an immature teenager who had run off, and was only now coming back into his son's life. Jonas was around 19 at the time, and the stunt casting generated a fair amount of buzz, but the character as written was thin, little more than a punchline about an irresponsible ex-boyfriend. That began to change when Tim Doyle stepped in as showrunner for the second season. Doyle wanted Ryan to evolve into someone with real substance, a character capable of challenging Mike Baxter intellectually rather than just being the deadbeat dad of the pilot. Jonas, whose schedule with the Jonas Brothers made a recurring television commitment impractical, did not return, and the role was recast with Jordan Masterson, previously known for his part on Greek. Masterson's version of Ryan grew steadily over the following years from a nervous kid into a confident, politically engaged young man, eventually running his own cannabis business in later seasons, a storyline the writers used for some pointed comedy about Ryan unknowingly becoming the kind of small business capitalist Mike Baxter could actually respect. By the spring of 2017, Last Man Standing was still performing well by any objective measure. It was ABC's second most-watched comedy, trailing only Modern Family, and it ranked as the network's third most-watched scripted series overall behind Modern Family and Grey's Anatomy, all while airing in the traditionally weak Friday slot. So when ABC announced it was canceling the show that May, the reaction from fans and from much of the cast was genuine shock. The timing fed a firestorm of speculation. Just weeks earlier, Allen had appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live and compared being a conservative in the entertainment industry to living in 1930s Germany, a comment that drew plenty of attention on its own. When the cancellation came shortly after, many assumed the two were connected, and conservative commentators, along with Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, publicly suggested the decision was politically motivated. ABC Entertainment President Channing Dungey pushed back firmly and repeatedly, telling reporters that the cancellation had nothing to do with politics and that it stemmed from the network's decision to move away from comedy programming on Friday nights entirely, a scheduling shift that also affected other series that season. She noted that the network had canceled shows with very different political leanings, including The Real O'Neills, for the exact same business reasons. Whatever the underlying motivation, there was a real financial dimension to the decision that rarely made the headlines. ABC did not own Last Man Standing outright. It was produced by 20th Century Fox Television and licensed to the network, meaning ABC was paying a substantial per-episode fee for a show it could not fully monetize through syndication and international sales the way it could with an in-house production. Combined with Allen's own salary, which had grown into six figures per episode by that point, the economics of keeping the show on a struggling night made it an easier target than its ratings alone would suggest. The cast did not take the news quietly. Allen wrote on social media that he felt stunned and blindsided by a network he had called home for years. Nancy Travis, who played his television wife Vanessa, thanked fans for their loyalty while expressing her own heartbreak over the decision. Hector Elizondo, who played Mike's employee and friend Ed, hinted in interviews that he suspected politics may have factored into call, even as the network continued to deny it. Meanwhile, some of the younger cast members reacted very differently. Molly Ephraim and Caitlin Dever did not expect any kind of reversal and quickly moved on to other projects, a decision that would matter enormously once the show unexpectedly came back to life. What happened next was one of the more remarkable grassroots campaigns in recent television history. Within days of the cancellation, an online petition calling for the show's revival gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Fans flooded social media with a dedicated hashtag. Some paid for billboard space in major cities urging the network to reconsider, and others mailed toy tools to ABC's offices as a wink to Allen's handyman persona from both this show and Home Improvement. The pressure campaign became large enough that it drew commentary from sitting politicians and conservative media figures, keeping the story in the news cycle for months after the show had technically ended. Behind the scenes, the studio was working a separate angle entirely. Fox, which had produced the series all along, began quietly shopping it to other networks, including CMT and NBC, hoping someone would pick up the license. It took roughly a year, but the turning point came when ABC's own revival of Roseanne became a massive ratings success in the spring of 2018. That performance convinced Fox's broadcast network that reviving a familiar, established comedy with a built-in audience was worth the financial risk. In May 2018, Fox officially announced it was bringing Last Man Standing back for a seventh season, investing roughly $50 million into the relaunch. A few days before the announcement went public, Allen had already dropped hints online, telling fans to keep up their campaign, a sign the deal was close to being finalized. Reviving a canceled series on a tight schedule is far harder than launching one from scratch. Fox announced the deal in May and set a premiere date for that September, giving the creative team only a few months to staff writers, break stories, and build a shooting schedule. Scripts went into development in June, with roughly 15 weeks to get episodes camera-ready. Production began that August, but the crew first had to rebuild the original sets from scratch, since the sound stage used during the ABC run had already been dismantled after the cancellation. The production later faced an entirely different kind of disruption when the COVID-19 pandemic forced a temporary halt partway through the show's run, adding new logistical headaches around safety protocols and quarantine periods for cast and crew. The financial picture on Fox looked different from the ABC years as well. Per episode costs climbed to roughly $1.1 million, up from around $800,000 previously, and Allen's salary rose to approximately $235,000 per episode, placing him among the higher-paid actors on network television at the time. To offset some of that spending, Fox sold streaming rights to Hulu and CMT for a substantial per-episode fee, while the production team looked for savings elsewhere, including tighter location shooting and more efficient scheduling. It was a financial bet, but the debut season on Fox delivered strong results, pulling in roughly 8 million viewers for the premiere and proving that the audience had not gone anywhere. Just as the show found its footing on a new network, it ran into a casting problem almost identical to the one it had faced with Kristen years earlier. Molly Ephraim, who had played Mandy Baxter for 6 seasons, assumed the show was finished for good after the ABC cancellation and had already committed to other projects, including roles in Brockmire, Halt, and Catch Fire. By the time Fox revived the series, those commitments made it impossible for her to return, and the producers had to recast the role once more. Rather than searching for a lookalike, the creative team went in a different direction and cast Molly McCook, an actress who looked nothing like Ephraim, and the show leaned into that difference with self-aware jokes rather than trying to hide it. The transition was rocky at first. When McCook debuted as Mandy in Season 7, a portion of the fanbase pushed back online with a hashtag rejecting the new casting outright. McCook stuck with it rather than trying to replicate her predecessor's performance, instead building out Mandy's passion for fashion design and giving the character more serious material involving pregnancy and her relationship with her on-screen husband. Over time, particularly through emotional scenes opposite Allen, audience resistance faded and McCook made the role her own. The most dramatic change in the cast's availability came from Caitlin Dever, who played youngest daughter Eve. After the initial cancellation, Dever pivoted hard toward film work, landing a pivotal role in Kathryn Bigelow's acclaimed drama Detroit. That performance opened doors quickly, and within about 18 months she had booked major parts in Booksmart, opposite Beanie Feldstein, and in the Netflix limited series Unbelievable, a role that earned her nominations at both the Golden Globes and the BAFTAs. Booksmart became a critical and commercial success as well, and by the time Fox revived Last Man Standing, Dever had transformed from a supporting sitcom actress into one of the more sought-after young performers in Hollywood. That success came at a direct cost to her availability. Dever transitioned from a full-time series regular to a recurring guest star, appearing in only 7 episodes of Season 7 and just 2 episodes of Season 8. Pandemic-related quarantine requirements made things even more complicated, since each of her appearances during that period required a lengthy isolation period beforehand, forcing writers to build entire episodes around narrow windows in her schedule. By the show's final season, she appeared in only 3 episodes, including the series finale. The writers handled her reduced presence by sending Eve off to the Air Force Academy, a plot device that let her drop in and out of the story without straining credibility, and the show made frequent use of video calls to keep her connected to the family even when Dever herself could not be on set. One late episode was built specifically around her limited availability, focusing entirely on Eve's relationship with her nieces and giving the character a proper emotional send-off despite the scheduling constraints. In the years surrounding those final seasons, Dever also took on high-profile roles in Dope Sick alongside Michael Keaton, in the film adaptation of Dear Evan Hansen, and later in the 2nd season of HBO's The Last of Us, a workload demanding enough that the show ultimately had to scrap plans for 2 of her episodes in Season 8 entirely. In May 2020, Fox announced that Last Man Standing would conclude after its 9th season, even though the show was still performing well, averaging more than 8 million viewers per episode and ranking as one of the network's top comedies. Producer Kevin Abbott later revealed the team had actually begun outlining ideas for a 10th season before the decision was finalized, including a storyline that would have had Amanda Fuller's character Kristen take over the family's sporting goods business and rebrand it, exploring themes of generational change within the Baxter family. Abbott has also said the writers hoped to bring back earlier guest stars for storylines that tied into their prior appearances, giving longtime viewers a sense of closure across the show's full run. Fox executives wanted the final season to include something bigger than a typical farewell, and Abbott was initially resistant, feeling the show worked best when it stayed focused on small, family-centered stories rather than stunt events. That changed when a member of the writing team proposed bringing back Tim, the tool man Taylor from Home Improvement, for a crossover appearance. Since Disney held the rights to that earlier series, the negotiations were complicated and reportedly were not finalized until the day before the script's table read, with Abbott admitting he had considered moving forward without full approval just to keep the production on schedule. Alan, who would be playing both Mike Baxter and Tim Taylor in the same episode, wanted the crossover handled respectfully, insisting that Taylor be given a believable reason for showing up in Colorado rather than appearing as a gimmick. The script went through several rewrites to satisfy everyone involved, including input from the original Home Improvement creative team, and Alan reportedly rewatched old episodes to make sure the two characters still felt distinct from one another. The finished episode included small nods to the earlier series and gave viewers a sense of what had happened to Tim Taylor in the years since, closing out the show's long run with one of its most talked about moments. Looking back at 9 seasons and 2 networks, the story of Last Man Standing was never really about a single scandal or a single villain. It was a show shaped again and again by ordinary industry forces. Actors outgrowing their roles and landing bigger opportunities elsewhere, network executives making cold financial calculations about licensing fees and time slots, and a global pandemic disrupting production schedules no one could have planned for. The politics surrounding Tim Allen's on-screen persona made for an easy headline, but the more consistent thread running through every cast change was much less dramatic. People build careers, schedules stop lining up, and shows either adapt or disappear. Last Man Standing adapted more than once, and that willingness to recast, rewrite, and rebuild is arguably the real reason it lasted as long as it did.